you have 50 gallons of sterile filtered water stacked in your basement. You have a premium gravity filter, 3 portable purifiers, and enough freeze-dried food to outlast a minor geopolitical collapse. You think you are prepared. You aren't. In fact, without realizing it, you have built a highly efficient biological trap. When things go wrong, people run to the store and buy water. They track shelf life, they calculate gallons per person per day, and they congratulate themselves on covering the basics. But your body does not run on water alone. It runs on a delicate, highly volatile chemical balance. In a crisis, your nervous system is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. You are sweating from physical exertion, sleeping poorly, and eating high-sodium, shelf-stable foods. Your cells are essentially leaking essential minerals by the hour. If you pour nothing but pure, distilled, or even basic tap water into that depleted system, you do not hydrate it, you dilute it. There is a clinical term for this: hyponatremia. In survival situations, it is a silent killer. When the concentration of sodium in your blood falls too low, your cells begin to swell. The first symptoms look like simple fatigue or a mild headache, things you would naturally ignore during an emergency. But as the dilution continues, your cognitive function degrades. Your decision-making, the single most critical asset you own in a survival scenario, goes offline. You stumble. You make poor choices. In extreme cases, your brain swells, leading to seizures or worse. And the dark irony of it all is that you did it to yourself by drinking the very water you spent months prepping. This is the great hydration paradox. Clean water keeps you alive, but under prolonged stress, plain water alone cannot sustain you. It lacks the electrolytes to unlock cellular absorption. It lacks the vitamins to prevent your body from physically breaking down within weeks. It offers zero digestive support, zero nervous system regulation, and absolutely nothing to combat the crushing, psychological monotony of a crisis. Yet, the entire survival industry ignores this gap. They sell you survival food buckets and high-tech water filters, leaving the critical middle ground completely empty. Serious survivalists, the ones who analyze historical disasters rather than buying marketing hype, know that your beverage supply needs to do heavy physiological lifting. They stock 10 specific drinks alongside their water. These are not luxury items or comfort treats. They are functional, chemical tools. Most of them cost next to nothing. Many of them never expire. They are designed to solve the physical and mental failures that water storage leaves wide open. And the drink at the absolute top of this list, the one that sits at number 1, has been used by elite military forces for over 200 years to sustain soldiers through the worst conditions imaginable. Yet, if you walk into the average prepper's pantry today, you will not find a single ounce of it. To understand why this gap exists, we have to look at how we actually process stress. When a crisis hits, your energy expenditure does not just double. Your nutritional demands shift entirely. Your immune system begins working overtime, your gut health degrades under tension, and your brain burns through glucose at an alarming rate. Water covers the volume, but it does not cover the biological cost. If you are planning to survive on a stockpile of white rice, canned beans, and flat, tasteless water, you're setting yourself up for a slow physical decline. Within 10 days, the food fatigue alone will begin to erode your morale. Within 3 weeks, the lack of fresh vitamin C will start compromising your immune system. Within a month, sleep deprivation and chronic low-grade inflammation will turn simple daily tasks into monumental hurdles. You do not need a massive budget to fix this. You do not need a basement full of expensive gear. You just need to understand the 10 formulas that bridged the gap between simple survival and actual sustained performance. Let us dissect exactly what belongs on those shelves, beginning with the highly controversial powder that most amateur preppers laugh at, until they actually find themselves in the dark. Number 10. Powdered flavored drink mix. The logistics of survival have never been defined by abundance. They are defined by bottlenecks. When you study the history of human crises, you quickly realize that the difference between those who survived and those who perished was rarely a lack of raw calories or water volume. It was almost always a geographic, political, or biological trap that disrupted a single delicate chemical pathway in the human body. Consider the winter of 1941. The British Ministry of Food was facing an existential crisis that had nothing to do with German Luftwaffe bombs falling on London. It was a geographic blockade. German U-boats in the Atlantic were systematically hunting down and sinking merchant vessels, effectively cutting off imports of citrus fruits from the Mediterranean and the Americas. The British population was weeks away from widespread scurvy. Scurvy is not a slow, gentle decline. It is a horrific, systematic breakdown of the human body's connective tissue. Without ascorbic acid, or vitamin C, the body cannot synthesize collagen. Old wounds, healed decades prior, literally tear themselves open. Teeth loosen in their sockets. Blood vessels rupture spontaneously beneath the skin. The British government did not solve this with advanced pharmaceutical laboratories. They solved it by mobilizing a domestic army of schoolchildren to harvest wild roships from rural hedgerows. By 1943, the Ministry of Food was processing over 500 tons of wild roships annually into a highly concentrated, stable syrup distributed to over 2.5 million children. This was not folk medicine. It was a calculated, state-sponsored public health intervention designed to bypass a geopolitical blockade. Gram for gram, dried roships carry up to 20 times more natural vitamin C than fresh oranges. The British survived the blockade because they found a way to store a critical micronutrient in a highly shelf-stable, easily transportable form. They understood that when global supply chains collapse, your geography instantly becomes your nutritional prison. We see the exact same pattern repeat during the American Civil War, from 1861 to 1865. The Union's naval blockade, famously known as the Anaconda Plan, wrapped a tight logistical noose around Confederate ports. It was designed to starve the South of industrial goods, but one of its most immediate physiological and psychological impacts was the total elimination of coffee imports. To a modern observer, coffee seems like a luxury. To a 19th century military commander, it was critical operational infrastructure. Without it, soldier performance plummeted and camp morale collapsed. Soldiers on both sides resorted to roasting whatever they could find: acorns, dandelion roots, corn kernels, and, most notably, chicory root. Chicory became the dominant survival beverage because of its unique chemical properties. It provided a bitter, dark drink that closely mimicked the sensory experience of coffee, but its true value was hidden in its root structure. Chicory is dense in inulin, a highly resilient prebiotic fiber. Inulin passes through the upper digestive tract completely intact, reaching the colon, where it feeds beneficial gut bacteria like bifidobacteria. During the Civil War, more soldiers died from dysentery and chronic diarrheal diseases than from actual battlefield combat. The sanitary conditions of military camps were atrocious, and water sources were routinely contaminated. Soldiers who drank roasted chicory were unwittingly reinforcing their gut microbiomes, building a biological shield against the pathogens thriving in their drinking water. The geographic trap of the blockade forced a desperate physical adaptation that illustrated a fundamental truth: a survival drink must do more than hydrate. It must actively defend your internal systems from the hostile environment around you. The ultimate proof of the water-only trap occurred a century later in 1971 during the Bangladesh Liberation War. Over 10 million refugees fled the conflict, crowding into unsanitary, flooded temporary camps along the Indian border. A massive cholera epidemic broke out. Cholera does not kill through direct tissue damage. It kills by triggering catastrophic, rapid dehydration. The cholera toxin binds to the cells of the small intestine, reversing the normal flow of fluids and forcing the body to rapidly expel water and essential salts. Patients were losing up to 20 liters of fluid a day. They were literally drying out from the inside, dying of hypovolemic shock within hours. Intravenous saline fluids, the standard treatment, were virtually non-existent in the muddy, overwhelmed refugee camps. Refilling water bottles did nothing. When patients drank plain water, their damaged intestines could not absorb it. They simply excreted it immediately. Enter Dr. Dilip Mahalanobis and his small team from the Johns Hopkins Center for Medical Research and Training. Facing a 30% mortality rate and a complete lack of medical infrastructure, they implemented a highly controversial, mass-scale test of oral rehydration salts. This was a precise, dry powder mix consisting of sodium chloride, sodium bicarbonate, potassium chloride, and glucose. The medical establishment was highly skeptical that an oral solution could treat severe cholera. Yet, by dissolving this specific mineral powder into ordinary water, Mahalanobis unlocked the sodium-glucose co-transport mechanism in the small intestine. When glucose and sodium are present together in the correct ratio, they force the intestinal walls to rapidly absorb water. Bypassing the cholera-toxins block, the results were immediate and staggering. The mortality rate in the refugee camps plummeted from 30% to less than 3%. It was one of the greatest medical breakthroughs of the 20th century, achieved not in a sterile, high-tech hospital, but in a chaotic, war-torn refugee camp using a cheap dry powder that cost pennies to manufacture. These historical case studies are not isolated historical curiosities. They are the exact blueprints that modern military planners use to design field rations today. During the Gulf War in 1991, military planners faced the extreme heat of the Iraqi desert, where dehydration was the primary threat to operational readiness. Soldiers drinking warm, flat water from plastic canteens began experiencing voluntary dehydration, a physiological phenomenon where individuals under intense stress refuse to drink enough plain water to replace lost fluids simply because of sensory fatigue. The solution was the rapid deployment of flavored, electrolyte-enriched powder mixes in every combat ration. It was not an attempt to pamper the troops. It was a calculated chemical intervention to manipulate human psychology and physical chemistry. The citric acid masked the chemical taste of purified water, while the electrolytes forced immediate cellular absorption. Without these powders, the multi-billion-dollar military apparatus in the desert would have ground to a halt due to heat exhaustion and cognitive decline. These historical events prove that in any crisis, plain water is only the first step. If you do not plan for the chemical, biological, and psychological traps that accompany a disruption, your water storage is simply a delay of the inevitable. If history teaches us anything, it is that crises do not announce themselves, they simply arrive. When they do, the breakdown of normal physiological stability happens much faster than civilian planners anticipate. In a prolonged disaster, we quickly see a clash of forces. Individual survival needs versus broken municipal infrastructure, corporate distribution networks versus local resource scarcity, and acute psychological stress versus physical endurance. Consider the direct reality of modern municipal water grid failures. In February of 2021, a severe winter storm crippled the electrical grid in Texas, leaving over 4.5 million homes without power and leaving more than 12 million people with disrupted water services. For days, families had to rely on stored water or melt snow. What immediately became apparent in local emergency rooms was not just acute dehydration, but a surge in acute gastrointestinal distress and rapid cognitive fatigue. The mechanism was simple. People were consuming water of unverified quality, or they were eating high-sodium canned emergency foods while drinking flat, unmineralized bottled water. Under stress, the body releases high levels of aldosterone, a hormone that regulates salt and water balance. This causes your kidneys to rapidly excrete potassium and retain sodium. If you do not actively replace potassium, magnesium, and calcium, this hormonal shift leads directly to muscle cramping, cardiac arrhythmia, and profound physical exhaustion. This is where the direct conflict between clinical reality and average civilian preparation becomes obvious. The average household stores plastic jugs of water that have sat in a dark closet for years. This water is flat, completely devoid of dissolved oxygen, and lacks any mineral complexity. Consuming this fluid under extreme cold or extreme heat does not restore systemic balance. It merely dilutes the remaining intracellular electrolyte reserves. This issue is compounded by a documented, but rarely discussed, biological barrier: stress-induced gastroparesis and appetite suppression. In high-stakes environments, the sympathetic nervous system triggers the fight-or-flight response, diverting blood flow away from the digestive tract and toward the skeletal muscles. This physiological shift slows down gastric emptying and suppresses the release of ghrelin, the hunger hormone. In a long-term survival situation, individuals frequently stop eating. They simply lose their appetite, even when high-calorie emergency rations are readily available. If this state persists for more than 72 hours, the body begins breaking down muscle tissue for energy, which increases the metabolic load on the kidneys and accelerates dehydration. To break this feedback loop, specialized emergency medical teams utilize natural digestive triggers. Powdered lemon juice, which contains high concentrations of citric acid, acts directly on the glossopharyngeal nerve. This trigger immediately stimulates salivary amylase and gastric acid production, signaling the brain that food is entering the system. This simple chemical trigger overrides the sympathetic nervous system's block on appetite, forcing the individual to feel hunger and consume the calories required to sustain physical labor. But the challenge is not just physical, it is profoundly psychological. During the 2010 Haiti earthquake, relief workers noticed a bizarre phenomenon among displaced populations in temporary camps. Even when clean, chlorinated water was distributed in massive quantities, people frequently refused to drink it. They complained that the water tasted dead or smelled too strongly of chemical treatment. This sensory rejection of necessary fluids is a major hurdle in disaster management. To combat this, humanitarian organizations rely on sensory variety. Canned sparkling water, despite its shorter shelf life of 2 to 3 years due to carbonation loss, serves a precise clinical purpose in these environments. The carbonic acid in sparkling water acts directly on the taste receptors, masking chemical purification tastes and providing a physical sensation that relieves mild nausea. Nausea is a primary symptom of waterborne pathogens and high-stress adrenaline spikes. Having a canned carbonated beverage available is not a matter of comfort. It is a rapid response medical tool to stabilize a volatile digestive system before severe vomiting can cause fatal fluid loss. Furthermore, we must look at the physical toll of sleep deprivation in these high-stress environments. In any crisis, sleep is the first variable to collapse. During the chronic power outages in Venezuela throughout 2019, civilian populations experienced prolonged periods of hypervigilance. The lack of reliable security, the constant noise of backup generators, and the complete disruption of daily routines caused widespread insomnia. When a human goes without deep sleep for more than 48 hours, the prefrontal cortex begins to fail. Reaction times slow down to levels equivalent to blood alcohol levels of 0.08%. Irritability increases, leading to interpersonal conflict within family units or shelter groups, which completely dissolves cooperative survival efforts. The active ingredients in chamomile tea, specifically the bioflavonoid apigenin, function by binding to benzodiazepine receptors in the central nervous system. This molecular interaction does not induce a heavy pharmaceutical sedation, but it successfully downregulates the overstimulated amygdala, allowing the brain to transition into slow-wave delta sleep. Under crisis conditions, a warm cup of chamomile is not a leisure activity. It is a targeted neurological intervention designed to preserve critical cognitive decision-making for the following day. Similarly, chronic inflammation presents an immediate threat to physical performance in the field. When physical labor increases, such as carrying heavy water containers, clearing debris, or walking long distances, without proper physical conditioning, muscle fibers sustain microtears, triggering a massive inflammatory response. Under normal conditions, this is resolved with rest and nutrition. In a survival situation where rest is impossible and nutrition is suboptimal, this inflammation accumulates. This is where the clinical efficacy of curcumin, the active compound in turmeric, becomes crucial. However, the corporate marketing of health supplements often hides a critical scientific fact. Curcumin has incredibly low bioavailability. When ingested alone, the liver rapidly metabolizes it through glucuronidation, excreting it before it can reach systemic circulation. To bypass this metabolic barrier, clinical formulations combine turmeric with piperine, the alkaloid found in black pepper. Piperine temporarily disables the liver enzymes responsible for metabolizing curcumin, increasing its systemic absorption by up to 2,000%. This simple combination allows a dry, stable powder mix to act as a powerful, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory agent, maintaining joint mobility and pain management when pharmaceutical supplies are restricted or depleted. The reality of these survival mechanisms shows that the human body is a highly complex chemical engine. When you strip away the modern conveniences of stable water pressure, consistent electricity, and climate-controlled environments, you are left with a raw biological struggle. If your emergency storage plan consists solely of dry grains and plain water, you have ignored the fundamental chemical inputs that keep that engine running under pressure. Every drink on this list is a targeted response to a specific, predictable point of failure in the human machine.